There is a quiet moment that arrives before every new year. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as a pause, sometimes unnoticed, where you sense that time is moving forward whether you are ready or not. Most years don't fail because people don't want change. They fail because nothing actually changes beneath the surface. Days roll into weeks. Weeks soften into months. And before long, another year has passed, filled with effort, noise, and good intentions, but very little direction. Not because you were lazy. Not because you didn't try. But because you were living without a framework strong enough to carry you through an entire year. This audiobook is not here to excite you. It is not here to push you. And it is not here to promise shortcuts. It exists for a quieter reason. It exists to help you live 2026 deliberately. Not aggressively. Not perfectly. But intentionally. A powerful year is not built on motivation. Motivation fades. A powerful year is built on structure. Mental, emotional, and practical structure that holds steady even when your energy doesn't. What you are about to listen to is not entertainment. It is a system. A slow, steady, 365-day game plan designed to help you stop drifting and start living from clarity. This is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters, consistently, calmly, and without self-betrayal. Over the next chapters, you will not be told who to become overnight. You will be guided to notice who you are becoming daily. You will learn how identity shapes behavior, how emotional discipline outlasts motivation, and how small, repeatable structures quietly change the direction of a life. There will be no pressure to rush. No demand to transform instantly. Only an invitation to take yourself seriously enough to build a year that reflects your values instead of your impulses. 2026 is framed here not as a hopeful year, but as a deliberate one. A year where you respond instead of react. A year where you finish more than you start. A year where your inner world becomes stable enough to support external progress. This audiobook is meant to be returned to, replayed, paused, lived with. Some days you will listen actively. Other days it will simply sit in the background, reminding you of the direction you chose. And before we go any further, there is a gentle question worth asking, not to answer perfectly but honestly. Are you willing to live the next year with intention, even when no one is watching? If the answer is yes, even a quiet yes, then you are in the right place. As we begin this journey together, take a moment to settle in. Let the noise slow down. Let the pace soften. This is not about urgency. It is about continuity. And if you find value in this kind of grounded, long-form guidance, if this feels like the kind of space you want to return to throughout the year, please like this audiobook and subscribe to the channel. It helps this work continue and ensures you don't lose access to the tools you may need again. When you're ready, we'll move into the first chapter. The year you stop drifting. Chapter 1, The year you stop drifting. There is a difference between failing and drifting, and most people misunderstand which one is more dangerous. Failure is visible. It has shape. It creates friction, feedback, and awareness. Drifting, on the other hand, is quiet. It feels harmless. Days pass without resistance, without clarity, without direction. Nothing is obviously wrong, yet nothing is intentionally right either. This is how most years collapse before they even begin. Not because of bad luck. Not because of a lack of effort. But because life is allowed to run on autopilot. When you drift, you still wake up. You still work. You still make plans. But those plans are reactive. They are shaped by urgency, by habit, by other people's expectations, by whatever feels loudest in the moment. Over time, this creates a strange exhaustion, one that rest doesn't fix. Because the tiredness isn't physical. It's directional. You're tired because you're moving without meaning. Drifting feels safe because it avoids discomfort. It avoids decision. It avoids responsibility for choosing a direction and standing by it. And yet, the cost of drifting is always higher than the cost of choosing and failing. A failed plan teaches you something. A drifted year teaches you nothing. When a year ends and you can't explain why it unfolded the way it did, that is not neutrality. That is loss. Loss of time. Loss of momentum. Loss of self-trust. Most people don't lack ambition. They lack a framework. Without a framework, every day is negotiated emotionally. You decide what matters based on how you feel, how tired you are, or how urgent something appears. And feelings, as you already know, are unstable leaders. A deliberate year is not one where everything goes well. It is one where you know why you are doing what you're doing, even on the days it feels heavy. Drifting removes that clarity. Borrowed goals are one of the most common signs of drift. Goals that sound impressive. Goals that look responsible. Goals that were absorbed slowly, from family, culture, social media, or comparison, without ever being questioned. You can work very hard toward a life you never consciously chose. And the danger is not just wasted effort. The danger is resentment. A quiet, growing frustration with yourself that you can't fully explain. You did what you were supposed to do. And yet, something feels misaligned. This audiobook begins here for a reason. Before habits, before identity, before systems, there must be a clear interruption of autopilot living. 2026 is not presented to you as a hopeful year. Hope without structure is fragile. It collapses under pressure. Instead, 2026 is framed as a deliberate year. One built on awareness, intention, and responsibility. Deliberate does not mean rigid. It means conscious. It means noticing how you make decisions. It means observing where your time goes without assuming it's fixed. It means recognizing patterns instead of excusing them. Most people react to life because reacting feels easier than choosing. Reaction absolves responsibility. If something just happened, then no decision was made. But over time, reaction becomes a lifestyle. And a reactive life is always controlled by external forces. Deadlines, moods, crises, other people's needs. Intention reverses that relationship. Intention does not remove difficulty. It removes confusion. When you live intentionally, you still face resistance. You still feel tired. You still encounter unexpected problems. But you are no longer negotiating your direction every single day. The framework is already there. You are simply moving within it. This is why drifting is more dangerous than failure. Failure happens within intention. Drifting happens in its absence. A year without a framework will always default to urgency. And urgency prioritizes what is loud, not what is important. Over time, this trains you to live in short bursts of reaction instead of long arcs of progress. You don't need a dramatic reset to stop drifting. You need awareness, followed by gentle but firm structure. It begins with noticing how often your days are decided for you. How often you postpone reflection because it feels uncomfortable. How often you delay commitment because it feels safer to stay undefined. Undefined lives feel flexible. In reality, they are easily controlled. Choosing intention means choosing to define what matters, what doesn't, what you are willing to carry into the year, and what you are finally willing to leave behind. This choice is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. But once made, it changes how everything else fits together. You don't stop drifting by forcing productivity. You stop drifting by deciding that your time deserves direction. As this chapter comes to a close, let this question sit with you, not to answer quickly, not to solve, but simply to notice. Where in your life have you been moving, without choosing the direction? There is no judgment in that question. Only information. And awareness, when treated honestly, is always the beginning of change. When you're ready, we'll move forward. Not faster. Just more deliberately. Chapter 2, Designing the Identity You Will Live From. Most people try to change their lives by changing what they do. They add habits. They create plans. They promise themselves discipline. And for a short while it works. Then it fades. Not because they are weak. Not because they lack motivation. But because behavior that is not supported by identity will always collapse under pressure. Identity is the quiet force behind every consistent action you take. It is not what you say you value. It is what you repeatedly prove through your behavior, especially when no one is watching. If 2026 is going to be different, it cannot be built on effort alone. Effort is unreliable. It depends on mood, energy, and circumstance. Identity, on the other hand, is stable. It acts even when conditions are imperfect. This chapter is not about doing more. It is about becoming someone for whom the right actions feel natural. Every year, people set goals that are disconnected from who they currently believe themselves to be. They want outcomes that belong to a future identity while still living from an old self-definition. This creates friction. And that friction eventually turns into self-sabotage. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. This is why consistency feels so difficult. Not because the actions are too hard, but because the person you are living from does not yet see those actions as normal. Identity is not a label. It is a reference point. When you say, "I'm the kind of person who finishes what I start," finishing becomes less about motivation and more about alignment. When you say, "I'm someone who protects my focus," distraction begins to feel out of place, not tempting. But identity must be chosen consciously. Otherwise, it is inherited, shaped by past failures, old narratives, and experiences that no longer reflect who you are becoming. Many people carry outdated self-definitions without realizing it. They describe themselves using old limitations. Someone who struggles with consistency, someone who can't focus, someone who always starts strong but fades. Over time, these descriptions stop feeling like observations and start functioning like rules. And rules shape behavior. Letting go of outdated identity is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. If you no longer see yourself as bad with discipline, then inconsistency can no longer be justified. This is why identity change often meets internal resistance, not because it's untrue but because it requires responsibility. Designing the identity you will live from in 2026 does not mean pretending. It means choosing deliberately what kind of person your daily actions will support. This is not about perfection. It is about alignment. A powerful identity is simple. It is not a list of traits. It is a few clear internal agreements. Agreements about how you show up, about what you tolerate, about what you return to when things slip. The question is not, what do I want to achieve this year? The deeper question is, who would I have to be for those outcomes to make sense? Who is the person that keeps promises to themselves, not because it's exciting but because it's normal? Who is the person that structures their time calmly instead of reacting to pressure? Who is the person that finishes, reflects, and adjusts instead of quitting? That person does not emerge overnight. They are built through repetition. Every small decision is a vote. Each time you act in alignment with the identity you are designing, you strengthen it. Each time you act against it, you weaken it. This is not about shame. It is about awareness. Willpower tries to overpower resistance. Identity removes the argument entirely. When you live from identity, discipline becomes quieter. You don't need to negotiate with yourself as often. You don't need to restart every Monday. You simply return to what feels consistent with who you are becoming. And when you fail, and you will at times, you don't collapse into old narratives. You correct. You realign. You continue. Because the identity is bigger than a single misstep. This is why identity must come before habits. Habits without identity feel heavy. Identity creates habits naturally. As you sit with this chapter, don't rush to define yourself perfectly. Instead, notice the identity you've been unconsciously living from. Notice the stories you repeat about yourself. Notice which ones still serve you, and which ones quietly limit you. Then let this question rest with you. Not as a task but as a reflection. Who are you choosing to become in 2026? And what kind of life would that person naturally live? When you're ready, we'll move forward. From becoming, to stabilizing the mind that carries that identity forward. Chapter 3, The 365-Day Mental Discipline Blueprint. A stable life is built on a stable inner world. Most people think they struggle with discipline, consistency, or focus. But beneath those surface issues is something quieter and more fundamental. Emotional instability. Not dramatic emotion. Not obvious chaos. But subtle swings in mood, energy, and perception that quietly determine how each day unfolds. When the mind is unstable, everything feels harder than it needs to be. Plans feel heavy. Decisions feel urgent. Small setbacks feel personal. This is why peak motivation never lasts. Motivation depends on emotional elevation. And emotional elevation is temporary by nature. It rises, it falls, and it cannot be sustained across an entire year. What carries you through 365 days is not intensity. It is neutrality. Emotional neutrality does not mean numbness. It means steadiness. It means your internal state is not constantly pulled around by every thought, feeling, or external trigger. You can feel doubt without obeying it. You can feel anxiety without reacting to it. You can feel resistance without turning it into a verdict about yourself. Most people live as if every emotion is a command. If they feel motivated, they act. If they feel uncertain, they pause. If they feel overwhelmed, they withdraw. Over time, this creates an emotionally reactive life. One where progress depends on how the day feels rather than what the year requires. Mental discipline is the skill of separating feeling from function. You don't wait to feel calm to act calmly. You don't wait to feel confident to show up consistently. You allow emotions to exist without letting them dictate direction. This is not suppression. Suppression ignores emotion and stores it. Discipline observes emotion and moves anyway. Anxiety, doubt, and inner noise are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that you are paying attention. The problem begins when those signals are treated as instructions rather than information. An anxious thought is not a prophecy. A doubtful feeling is not a decision. Inner noise is not truth, it is movement. Mental clarity comes from learning how to let the mind speak without letting it steer. This is why many people feel exhausted even when they aren't doing much. They are mentally negotiating all day. Every task becomes a debate. Every decision becomes emotional. And emotional labor, repeated daily, drains energy faster than physical effort. A 365-day mental discipline blueprint is not about controlling thoughts. It is about creating enough internal space that thoughts no longer crowd your behavior. This begins with daily mental resets. Small, quiet moments where you return to center. Not to feel better, but to see more clearly. A mental reset might look like pausing before reacting. It might look like naming what you're feeling without explaining it. It might look like continuing with your structure even when the mind resists. These resets compound. Most people underestimate how powerful emotional regulation becomes when practiced gently and consistently. One neutral response today makes the next one easier. One calm correction builds trust. Over time, you stop fearing your own internal states. You begin to realize something important. Emotions pass whether you obey them or not. This understanding changes everything. When you stop trying to eliminate discomfort, you stop being controlled by it. You stop restructuring your life around avoiding unpleasant feelings. You move forward while carrying them, and they gradually lose their authority. Mental discipline also requires reducing inner noise. Noise is created when attention is scattered. When too many inputs compete for priority. When your mind is constantly switching contexts without rest. Clarity is not achieved by adding more information. It is achieved by reducing interference. A disciplined mind is selective. It limits exposure. It respects silence. It understands that not every thought deserves engagement. This doesn't happen through force. It happens through repetition. Each time you choose not to react immediately. Each time you allow uncertainty to exist without chasing resolution. Each time you return to your structure instead of spiraling, you reinforce calm authority over your inner world. Over the course of a year, this changes your nervous system. You become harder to destabilize. Not because life becomes easier, but because your response becomes steadier. This is how you create calm, steady control. Not control over life, but control over how you meet it. As this chapter comes to a close, let this idea settle quietly. You do not need to feel different to live differently. You need to become less reactive to what you feel. And as you move forward, carry this reflection with you. What would change in your life if your emotions informed you, but no longer commanded you? When you're ready, we'll continue. From stabilizing the mind, to anchoring the day itself. Chapter 4, The Power of Daily Non-Negotiables. Most lives are shaped not by the big decisions people remember, but by the small ones they repeat. The problem is not that people lack ambition. It is that their days have no anchors. When life becomes unpredictable, and it always does, most routines disappear first. Motivation fades. Energy fluctuates. Unexpected demands appear. And without something stable to return to, the day is decided by whatever feels most urgent or most comfortable in the moment. This is where daily non-negotiables come in. Non-negotiables are not extreme habits. They are not time-consuming rituals. They are small, repeatable actions that remain intact regardless of mood, weather, or circumstance. They exist to keep you aligned on the days when alignment feels hardest. Intensity feels powerful, but it is unreliable. Intensity depends on emotional charge. It surges, it impresses, and then it collapses. Consistency, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't feel dramatic. But it compounds, and compounding is what shapes years. A single intense week rarely changes a life. A simple action repeated daily almost always does. This is why non-negotiables must be small enough to survive bad days. If a habit requires high energy, high focus, or perfect conditions, it is not a non-negotiable. It is a preference. And preferences disappear under pressure. A non-negotiable is something you do even when you are tired. Even when you are unmotivated. Even when the day doesn't go as planned. Not because you force yourself, but because you have decided that this action represents who you are. This is where identity and behavior quietly merge. Daily non-negotiables work because they remove daily decision-making. You are no longer asking, should I do this today? The decision has already been made. All that remains is execution. This reduces mental fatigue. It preserves energy. And most importantly, it builds trust with yourself. Every time you follow through on a small promise, you reinforce the identity you are designing. You become someone who does what they said they would do, even in modest ways. The goal is not volume. It is reliability. 3 to 5 non-negotiables are enough. More than that, and they begin to compete for attention. Fewer than that, and the structure becomes fragile. These actions should touch the core areas of your life. Not everything, just what stabilizes you. Something that grounds your mind. Something that moves your body. Something that maintains order. Something that reconnects you with direction. They should be simple enough that skipping them feels stranger than completing them. Over time, something subtle happens. These small actions begin to regulate your days. Even when everything else feels chaotic, there is a sense of continuity. A quiet signal that you are still aligned, still moving, still participating in your own life. This matters more than people realize. Bad days don't destroy progress. Abandoned structure does. Non-negotiables protect you from the all-or-nothing mindset. They allow you to succeed even on low-capacity days. And success, even in small form, keeps momentum alive. There will be days when you do more than your non-negotiables. And there will be days when those actions are all you manage. Both are acceptable. What matters is that the thread remains unbroken. This is how identity is reshaped quietly. Not through grand reinvention, but through repeated proof. Each completed non-negotiable is a vote for the person you are becoming. And votes, over time, outweigh intentions. You don't rise on the days you feel strong. You stabilize on the days you feel weak. As 2026 unfolds, these small anchors will matter more than any burst of motivation. They will be the reason you don't drift. The reason you return. The reason progress continues even when conditions are imperfect. As this chapter settles, consider this reflection, not as a task but as awareness. If your worst days still included a few quiet, intentional actions, how differently would the year feel? When you're ready, we'll continue. From daily anchors to designing time that protects your energy. Chapter 5. Mastering time without burning out. Most people don't struggle with time. They struggle with energy. Time continues whether you manage it or not. What determines progress is not how many hours you have, but how those hours are used, and how depleted you are when using them. Burnout rarely comes from doing meaningful work. It comes from scattered effort, constant urgency, and days that demand attention without offering direction. This is how hustle culture quietly fails people. It glorifies movement without alignment. Being busy becomes a substitute for being effective. And over time, the body and mind push back. Effectiveness is calm. Busyness is loud. When your days are full but your progress feels thin, it is often because your time is reacting rather than responding. Tasks pile up. Notifications interrupt. Priorities shift midday. And without realizing it, you spend your energy managing noise instead of building momentum. Sustainable productivity begins with a simple shift. You stop asking, "How much can I do?" and start asking, "What deserves my best energy?" Energy is not evenly distributed throughout the day. Focus has rhythms. Attention rises and falls. When you ignore these natural patterns, you work harder for less return. When you respect them, effort becomes more efficient. This is not about squeezing more into the day. It is about protecting what matters. Designing days that protect focus means acknowledging limits without guilt. It means accepting that not everything can be prioritized at once. And it means letting go of the idea that productivity is measured by exhaustion. A well-designed day has space. Space to think. Space to recover. Space to complete without rushing. Without that space, even meaningful work begins to feel heavy. Most burnout is not caused by too much work, it is caused by too much interruption. Each interruption fractures attention. Each context switch drains energy. And over time, the mind never fully settles into depth. Protecting focus requires boundaries, not dramatic ones but quiet ones. Limits on input. Limits on availability. Limits on how often you allow urgency to override intention. This is where rhythm becomes more powerful than rigid schedules. Daily structure provides stability, but weekly and monthly rhythms provide perspective. They allow you to zoom out, to see patterns, to notice what is working and what is draining you. A week without reflection becomes reactive. A month without review becomes chaotic. Rhythm planning is not about controlling every hour. It is about creating predictable cycles of effort and recovery. Times to push. Times to maintain. Times to pause and recalibrate. When weeks have rhythm, setbacks don't feel catastrophic. They are simply part of the cycle. You stop interpreting temporary fatigue as failure. You stop forcing output when restoration is needed. This is how burnout is prevented, not through rest alone but through intelligent pacing. When your time is aligned with your energy, discipline becomes less strained. You no longer rely on constant self-control. You rely on structure that supports you. And something important changes. You begin to trust yourself again. You stop overcommitting. You stop underestimating recovery. You stop measuring success by how drained you feel at the end of the day. Effectiveness shows up quietly. Tasks get finished. Focus deepens. And progress, though less dramatic, becomes more reliable. This chapter is not asking you to become faster. It is asking you to become steadier. Because steady progress is what carries you through an entire year. As you reflect on this, let one idea settle. If your days were designed to protect your energy instead of exhaust it, what would you stop doing, and what would finally receive your full attention? When you're ready, we'll continue. From mastering time, to reshaping the relationships that influence how that time is lived. Chapter 6. The Relationship Reset Strategy. Every relationship you maintain consumes energy. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes the cost is subtle, a lingering tension, an unspoken obligation, a constant need to explain yourself. Over time, these small drains shape your emotional state more than you realize. Most people think of relationships as separate from productivity, focus, or personal growth. In reality, relationships quietly determine how much emotional bandwidth you have left for your own life. This chapter is not about cutting people off. It is about becoming honest about alignment. Emotional bandwidth is limited. When it is spread too thin, even good intentions begin to feel heavy. You become less present, more reactive, more exhausted. And often you don't know why, only that something feels off. This is the cost of unexamined relationships. Many people stay connected out of habit, guilt, or history. They continue patterns long after those patterns stop supporting who they are becoming. And because the relationships are familiar, the drain is normalized. But familiarity does not equal alignment. A relationship can be long-standing and still misaligned. It can be loving and still draining. Recognizing this is not betrayal. It is awareness. Protecting emotional bandwidth begins with noticing how you feel after interactions. Not during, after. Do you feel clearer or more scattered? Calmer or more tense? Supported or subtly diminished? These signals matter. You are not required to justify your boundaries to understand them. Boundaries are not punishments. They are structures that allow relationships to exist without resentment. Resentment grows when energy is given without consent. When availability is assumed. When your needs are consistently postponed to keep the peace. Letting go without resentment means releasing the expectation that everyone must come with you into the next version of your life. Some relationships belong to earlier chapters. Honoring that truth quietly is healthier than forcing continuity where alignment no longer exists. This does not always mean separation. Sometimes it means redefining the role. Less access. Clearer limits. Fewer emotional negotiations. Growth-friendly relationships are not always comfortable. They challenge you. But they do not confuse you. They do not require you to shrink, perform, or constantly recover afterward. Aligned relationships respect your direction, even if they don't fully understand it. This chapter invites you to audit relationships without drama. Without confrontation. Without explanations that turn into arguments. An internal audit is enough. Who supports your structure? Who destabilizes it? Who respects your boundaries? Who benefits from their absence? These are not moral questions. They are practical ones. When emotional bandwidth is protected, clarity improves. Focus deepens. Decisions feel less heavy. And self-trust strengthens, because you are no longer abandoning yourself to maintain connection. 2026 is not about isolation. It is about intentional connection. Relationships that support growth do not demand constant access. They allow space. They encourage reflection. They adapt as you adapt. And when certain connections begin to fade, it does not have to be dramatic. Some endings are quiet. Some shifts happen without announcement. Some distances grow naturally once energy is no longer forced. This is not loss. It is realignment. As this chapter settles, hold this reflection gently. Which relationships in your life restore your energy, and which ones quietly consume it? There is no urgency to act. Only awareness to carry forward. When you're ready, we'll continue. From relationships, to aligning the way you manage what you earn, spend, and protect. Chapter 7, Financial Alignment for the Next Version of You. Money is rarely just about money. It is about safety, control, freedom, and often self-respect. Most financial stress does not come from a lack of income alone. It comes from disorder, from unclear systems, from avoidance, from decisions made emotionally rather than intentionally. This chapter is not about wealth fantasies or dramatic financial transformations. Those narratives create pressure without stability. Instead, this chapter is about alignment, quiet, practical alignment between who you are becoming and how you manage what passes through your hands. Financial anxiety thrives in chaos. Clarity weakens it. When money is unstructured, every expense feels heavier than it needs to. Decisions are made reactively. Small purchases create guilt. Larger ones create fear. And over time, money becomes something you manage emotionally instead of strategically. Order changes that relationship. Spending is not neutral. It is an identity statement. Not because of what you buy, but because of how intentionally you decide. Each financial choice reinforces a story about who you are. Someone who plans or someone who reacts. Someone who avoids or someone who faces reality calmly. This is not about restriction. It is about respect. Self-respect shows up financially as clarity. Knowing what comes in. Knowing what goes out. Knowing why. When this is absent, even high income can feel unstable. When it is present, modest income can feel manageable. A simple financial structure is not complicated. In fact, simplicity is what makes it sustainable. Complex systems are abandoned under pressure. Simple ones survive. Structure creates predictability. Predictability reduces anxiety. And reduced anxiety frees up mental space for everything else in your life. Most people delay financial organization because they fear what they'll see. But avoidance does not protect you from discomfort. It prolongs it. The moment clarity arrives, fear begins to lose its grip. You don't need to control every future outcome. You need to create order in the present. This is how financial calm is built. Not through perfection, but through consistency. When money is managed with intention, it stops being a constant background stressor. You stop negotiating with yourself every time you spend. You stop carrying unspoken worry. And gradually trust rebuilds. Trust in your ability to handle reality. The next version of you does not panic around money. Not because everything is ideal, but because systems are in place. Systems that reduce emotional decision-making. Systems that create margins. Systems that allow adjustment without collapse. This is what financial alignment looks like. You don't need to become someone else overnight. You need to stop abandoning yourself financially. When spending aligns with values, shame fades. When income is respected, even in small amounts, confidence grows. And when financial order becomes normal, anxiety no longer runs the show. As 2026 unfolds, money will come and go. That is inevitable. What changes is how you relate to it. Whether it destabilizes you, or simply becomes another part of a well-structured life. Let this reflection sit quietly with you. If your financial decisions reflected self-respect rather than impulse or avoidance, how differently would you feel moving through the year? When you're ready, we'll continue. From financial alignment, to the discipline of finishing what you start. Chapter 8, the discipline of finishing what you start. Most people do not fail because they aim too high. They fail because they stop halfway, quietly, gradually, without ever naming it. Abandonment is rarely dramatic. There is no clear decision to quit. Instead, interest fades. Resistance grows. Other things feel more urgent. And eventually, what once mattered is left unfinished, carrying with it a subtle weight. That weight accumulates. Every unfinished project leaves behind more than lost progress. It leaves behind doubt. A quiet erosion of self-trust. Over time, this creates a pattern where starting feels exciting but finishing feels unfamiliar. This is why completion matters more than inspiration. Inspiration initiates. Completion transforms. Most goals die halfway not because they are impossible, but because the emotional experience changes. The beginning is fueled by novelty and possibility. The middle is marked by effort, uncertainty, and repetition. And without preparation for this shift, many people misinterpret discomfort as a sign to stop. But discomfort is not a signal to abandon. It is a signal that the work has moved from imagination into reality. The middle is where identity is tested. This is where emotional resistance appears, not as fear but as boredom, doubt, or the urge to redirect energy elsewhere. The mind begins to search for relief. New ideas appear more attractive. Starting something else feels easier than continuing what has become demanding. This is not a character flaw. It is human behavior. The problem arises when unfinished cycles become normal. Each time something is left incomplete, the mind learns a lesson. Effort does not require follow-through. Over time, this weakens confidence, not because you can't finish but because you no longer expect yourself to. The discipline of finishing is not about forcing productivity. It is about building trust with yourself through completion. Finishing does not mean perfection. It means closure. When something is finished, it stops pulling at your attention. It releases energy. It creates a sense of finality that restores mental space. Unfinished things linger. They quietly drain focus. Building the muscle of finishing begins with redefining success. Success is not how motivated you feel at the start. It is whether you stay present through the uncomfortable middle and bring something to completion, even imperfectly. This requires emotional maturity. You must be willing to continue without enthusiasm. To accept that progress will sometimes feel flat. To let go of the fantasy version of the goal and work with the reality in front of you. And when resistance shows up, you don't argue with it. You acknowledge it. You move anyway, not with force but with steadiness. Completion creates confidence because it proves something to you, that you can be trusted to follow through. That proof matters. Each finished cycle strengthens identity. You become someone who completes. Someone who does not rely on emotional momentum. Someone who can carry effort through uncertainty. This changes how you approach future goals. You choose more carefully. You commit more fully. You no longer chase novelty for validation. And when something truly needs to be released, not abandoned but intentionally concluded, you do so consciously. With clarity. Without self-betrayal. This is the difference between quitting and completing. As 2026 unfolds, there will be moments when starting feels easier than continuing. When distraction calls. When effort feels unrewarded. These moments are not failures. They are invitations to practice finishing. Let this reflection rest with you. What unfinished cycles in your life are still quietly asking for closure? And what kind of confidence would return if you honored them? When you're ready, we'll continue. From completion to building resilience for the days when life interrupts your plans. Chapter 9. Building resilience for the inevitable hard days. No year unfolds cleanly. There will be days when your structure holds and days when it doesn't. Days when energy is steady and days when it disappears without warning. Interruptions will arrive, some small, some destabilizing. This is not a flaw in the plan. It is the nature of being alive. Resilience is not the ability to avoid disruption. It is the ability to return without self-punishment. Most people don't collapse because of one bad day. They collapse because they interpret a setback as a verdict. One missed routine becomes evidence of failure. One emotional dip becomes a reason to abandon the entire structure. This is where shame quietly does the most damage. Shame turns interruption into identity. It shifts the focus from recovery to self-judgment. Resilient people do not experience fewer setbacks. They recover faster. And recovery is a skill that can be built. Emotional recovery systems exist to hold you when motivation disappears. They are not reactive fixes. They are pre-decided responses to difficulty. Without these systems, setbacks feel personal. With them, setbacks feel expected. This distinction matters. When relapse is framed as proof of weakness, quitting feels logical. When relapse is framed as information, adjustment becomes possible. You will not live 2026 without moments of regression. Habits will slip. Focus will scatter. Emotional weight will increase. This does not erase progress. It tests structure. Returning to structure after disruption requires removing drama. You do not restart everything. You do not overcorrect. You simply return to the smallest stable point. Structure does not need to be rebuilt from scratch. It needs to be resumed. This is why daily non-negotiables matter. Why identity matters. Why emotional neutrality matters. They give you something to return to when everything else feels uncertain. Resilience grows when you stop demanding perfection from yourself. When you allow the year to be human. When you accept that progress includes pauses, detours, and recalibration. The strongest systems are flexible. They bend under pressure without breaking. Handling hard days without quitting requires one quiet decision: to treat disruption as temporary. Temporary fatigue does not require permanent retreat. Temporary chaos does not require permanent abandonment. You learn to separate the moment from the meaning. When things fall apart, you slow down. You reduce complexity. You focus on what stabilizes rather than what accelerates. And gradually momentum returns, not through force but through patience. This is what makes a year navigable rather than fragile. A navigable year is not defined by smoothness. It is defined by continuity. The ability to pause without disappearing. To reset without shame. To continue without dramatic declarations. As 2026 moves forward, there will be days that ask more of you than you expected. On those days, resilience will not look impressive. It will look quiet. It will look like showing up imperfectly. Like returning gently. Like refusing to quit on yourself. Let this reflection remain with you. When life interrupts your plans, do you punish yourself? Or do you return to structure and continue? When you're ready, we'll move into the final chapter. Not to rush the ending, but to close the year with clarity, proof, and continuity. Chapter 10. Ending 2026 with proof, not hope. The year you've lived is not measured by what you hoped for. It is measured by what you built, what you sustained, and what you proved to yourself. Most people close a year with hope alone. They make resolutions. They review failures with guilt. They imagine what should have been, instead of acknowledging what actually is. Hope without proof is fragile. It disappears at the first challenge. Proof, on the other hand, is concrete. It is the record of what was done, the lessons observed, the moments of discipline maintained. Proof is tangible. It does not fade, and it carries momentum. This final chapter is not about celebrating perfection. It is about reflecting honestly, without judgment, without exaggeration, without unnecessary self-criticism. Reflection begins with observation. Look at the year that unfolded. Not how it compares to ideals. Not how it stacks against others. But how it compares to the person you intended to become. How consistent were you with identity, habits, and intentional action? Measure both internally and externally. Internally, ask, how did I respond when life disrupted my plans? When motivation faltered? When setbacks arrived? Did I maintain steadiness? Did I return to structure with dignity? Did I act from intention rather than reaction? Each instance of alignment, however small, is evidence. Externally, observe. What progress is visible? What outcomes were achieved, sustained, or improved? Which areas of life have quietly shifted because of repeated, deliberate action? Even small, cumulative change is proof that the year was not wasted. Next, extract lessons. 2026 is not a year of regret. It is a year of learning. Where did my systems fail? Where did my identity hold? Which relationships supported me and which distracted? What choices would I make differently, and which choices deserve continued practice? Lessons are not judgment, they are guides for the next chapter. Closure is also about gratitude, not the sentimental kind but the functional kind. Appreciation for what was possible, what you committed to, and what you managed to navigate. Recognition of your own consistency builds self-trust. Self-trust is the foundation for everything that follows. Finally, carry the momentum forward. The end of a year is not a deadline. It is a checkpoint. It is a signal to pause, reflect, and recommit. The practices, identities, rhythms, and mental discipline you cultivated, however imperfectly, are not meant to vanish. They are the foundation for the next chapter of life. This is how proof replaces hope. Not by dreaming bigger but by observing honestly. Not by forcing perfection but by measuring integrity. Not by imagining success but by counting what has already been done. As you close this year, ask yourself one quiet question. What did I prove to myself in 2026, and how will I carry that proof into 2027? Answer it without hurry. Without fanfare. Without pressure. Let the reflection settle. When you return to the start of the next year, you will not be starting from hope. You will be starting from evidence. From consistency. From the person you have quietly become. And with that evidence, every decision, every action, and every day gains clarity. Every moment becomes another opportunity to build forward, steadily, intentionally, and without collapse. This is the calm conclusion of a deliberate year. If you have found value in this audiobook, in this process of reflection and structure, I invite you to like and subscribe to the channel. Return here whenever you need to ground yourself, review your year, or reinforce the quiet, steady path you've chosen. 2026 is complete. Not perfectly but intentionally. And with proof in hand, the journey continues. You have reached the end of this journey through 2026, a year we framed not with hope, but with deliberate intention. From the very beginning, we invited you to notice where you had been drifting, to recognize the autopilot routines that quietly shaped your days, and to consider what it would mean to stop reacting and start choosing. We explored the importance of becoming before doing, shaping your identity so that every action could flow naturally from who you are becoming, not from fleeting motivation or willpower. We slowed down to understand the mind itself. We learned that mental discipline is not about constant inspiration, but about steady, calm control. That the small daily actions, your non-negotiables, matter more than intensity because repeated, quiet proof creates the person you want to become. We explored time, not as something to be filled but as something to align with your energy. We learned that protecting focus, creating rhythm, and pacing yourself are the real keys to sustainable progress. And we looked at the people around you, how relationships, boundaries, and aligned connections either support or drain your energy. We reflected on money not as a fantasy or a symbol, but as a tool for clarity, freedom, and self-respect. And we confronted one of the most subtle challenges of all: unfinished projects, abandoned cycles, and the quiet erosion of self-trust that occurs when commitments are left incomplete. Through discipline and persistence, we learned how to finish what we start even when the journey feels heavy. We prepared for the inevitable interruptions and hard days, recognizing that resilience is not about avoiding disruption, but about returning to structure calmly without shame or panic. And finally, we closed the year with proof, measuring progress, extracting lessons, and carrying momentum into the future, not relying on hope, but trusting the evidence of what has already been done. Every chapter of this audiobook has been about the quiet accumulation of small, intentional choices. About designing a life that is navigable, steady, and aligned with the person you are becoming. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Not dependent on bursts of emotion. Just deliberate. Just consistent. Just yours. As you move forward, consider this final question. What have you proven to yourself through 2026, and how will that proof shape the years ahead? Hold that reflection. Let it guide your next steps. Let it remind you that growth is patient, that change compounds, and that the person you are becoming is always more reliable than the person you were yesterday. Return to this audiobook whenever you need to ground yourself, to review the structure you've built, or to remember the quiet power of deliberate, consistent action. If this journey has given you clarity or insight, I encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel. Stay connected, and return whenever you need a steady voice to guide you through the reflection, planning, and alignment that creates meaningful years. 2026 is complete. Not perfect, not effortless, but intentional. And with proof in hand, every future year is navigable, every challenge approachable, and every day an opportunity to show up as the person you are becoming.